Everyone, calling to order the Board of Selectmen meeting for the town of Hingham for January 31st, 2019. Before we get to the principal subject of this meeting, we have a few issues in front of us. And first item of business is approval of the minutes. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes of January. I'm sorry. Mr. Asher has to make an announcement before we proceed.
I call to order the Thursday, January 31st, 2019 meeting of the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Asher. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes of January 29, 2019.
So moved. Oh, second.
All those in favor? Aye. Public comment for items not on the agenda. Hearing none. Get right to the public hearing for a transfer of a Class 1 license. All the papers in order? Okay. You have somebody here? Great. Identify yourself by name and address, please.
My name is Scott Silverman. I am the general counsel for Prime Automotive Group. Did you want my personal?
No, that's fine. That's fine. What are you proposing here?
We are proposing, pursuant to an agreement between Prime Automotive Group and Gallery Automotive Group, that we will be operating after closing on the transaction, the mini dealership that is located at the 1040 Hingham Street address. The mini dealership is located on the portion of the property that is in Hingham. Okay. And we will not be changing anything with regard to the operations, simply taking over ownership and continuing to operate it as it is operated right now. We are looking forward to being a good, solid commercial citizen of the town of Hingham, as we are throughout all of the Commonwealth, and we appreciate your consideration.
Okay. Questions from my colleagues?
And it's only the mini dealership? It's only the mini dealership portion of that stretch?
So the mini portion of the dealership is located in Hingham.
Oh, I see, I see.
The majority of
the rest of it
is
okay.
located in Rockland, so
okay.
we do have a license in Rockland, as did the gallery group before us. So we're here just for the license as it relates to the mini operations.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
Motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the application for the transfer of the Class 1 license from Gallery Automotive Group, LLC, to AMR Auto Holdings, MINR, LLC, doing business as South Shore Mini. Dave Rosenberg, manager.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Best
for
of luck
coming
to
in.
you.
Very much.
Good luck.
Next on the agenda, grant of location hearings. We have two. Mr. Sylvester? Good evening, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our town representative, Harry Sylvester, as well as Mr. Stephen Olson from the water company. Let's take them one at a time. What do you got?
What's first on your agenda? Which street?
Forget-me-not Lane?
Pardon me?
Forget-me-not Lane? How could you forget?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been coordinating with the DPW. We're requesting a grant of location on Bradley Hill Road and Bremer Circle. Want to replace some existing main. It's some 6-inch and some 2-inch main, AC pipe and cast iron pipe. We're going to replace it. We are proposing to replace it with 8-inch ductile iron pipe, approximately 1,600 feet on Bradley Hill Road and 160 feet on Bremer Circle. Bremer Circle is currently fed through an easement from Lincoln Street, and we're proposing to feed it from Bradley Hill Road to make it a little bit, keep it in the roadway rather than through an easement. The work includes water mains, valves, and hydrants, and also services. And we're trying to get in there quickly, replace the main, and get out of there so that the town DPW can get in there and pave.
When do you anticipate doing this work?
As soon as the town opens the roads and allows us to get in there.
Ray, when is that typically?
April 15th is generally the date that we allow street opens. In certain cases, we'll let them go forward earlier if the weather permits. The sooner the better for this project.
So you'd coordinate that start date with Aquarion directly if the weather breaks before?
Once the board, if the board approves the grant location, we'll be looking at the weather, and as soon as the contractor's ready to start digging, we'll meet on site and coordinate work according to the weather. I'm hoping sometime beginning of March would be a good time to start digging if weather cooperates.
And you can accommodate that change in timeline, Mr. Olson?
Yes, we're planning to start in March.
May I just ask that, that all of the neighbors and the folks who live on those roads just receive, significant, that they receive notification with a little bit of time, just so that they know what to expect, how long it will last. Harry, I think you guys typically, or I think people are typically notified, a week in advance or something. I think they appreciate that.
Yeah, Aquarion will be responsible for going, from door to door. We'll also put notices on the town website regarding the start date of work. And I know from personal experience, by speaking to a number of those neighbors up there, they are very anxious to get this project underway.
Okay.
I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the request of Aquarion to install and maintain approximately 1,600 feet of 8-inch ductile iron water main in Bradley Hill Road. The new main will originate at the intersection of Lincoln Street, connecting into the existing 6-inch cast iron water main, and continue under the paved surface of Bradley Hill Road in its entirety to completion at number 65. This new main replacement project will replace and upgrade an undersized 6-inch ACCI and 2-inch CI pipe. Also, this project will include new water service and 3 new hydrants. In addition, part of this project includes installing and maintaining approximately 160 feet of 8-inch ductile iron water main in Bremer Circle. The new main will originate at the new 8-inch ductile iron main installed in Bradley Hill Road and continue under the paved surface of Bremer Circle in its entirety to completion at number 10 Bremer Circle. This new main replacement project will replace and upgrade an undersized 2-inch cast iron pipe. Also, this project will include new water services and 1 new hydrant. This approval is subject to the stipulation of the Department of Public Works as outlined in the letter dated 11 January 2019.
Second?
Those in favor?
Aye.
Next, Forget-Me-Not Lane.
Mary, can I just ask a question? I'm sorry, about the hydrant for that location?
Sure. Come on up. Identify yourself by name and address, please.
Hi, Jen Murphy, 29 Bradley Hill Road. I was just hoping to see a map to see the placement of the hydrants. I know I had a conversation, so I know that there's a map that exists.
There you go.
I think it's on my property, so.
Are any of the fire hydrants on private property?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Hydrants can be, field located
Yeah.
right away.
Yeah, I think that's where I thought it was. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay, Forget-Me-Not Lane.
Okay, Forget-Me-Not Lane is a private way. However, we will have to do work on South Street to make the connection. Forget-Me-Not Lane is an existing 2-inch cast iron main, about 230 feet of pipe, and we're proposing to put in 230 feet of 8-inch ductile iron pipe. It includes a hydrant at the end and several services.
What's the water table there? Is that an issue?
Shouldn't be. If need be, we have to de-water.
Questions from my colleagues?
Good.
Questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Is there going to be a fire hydrant?
Come up to the podium, please, and give your name and address before you ask your question. Good evening.
Amy Matthews on South Street, but we back up to Forget.
Okay.
Is there going to be a fire hydrant there
Yes,
as
we're
well?
proposing to put a fire hydrant on the grass strip at the cul-de-sac.
Oh, in the circle,
Yep.
okay. And this will be, I know you said early March for Bremer Lane, but, so does that mean like
This will be
mid-March?
after that, so most likely 8 to 10 weeks. We'll begin work on Forget-Me-Not Lane about 8 weeks after beginning Bradley Hill and Bremer Circle.
Okay, so May. So if we're doing some construction on our house, and I'm just wondering if that's going to interfere. Trucks can still get in there? Or-
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Great, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Anybody else? Take a motion?
I move that we approve the request of Aquarion to install and maintain approximately,
Oh, I'm sorry. Sheila?
Sheila Calhoun, I live at 5 Forget-Me-Not Lane. Just wondering how the services, the new services are going to be branched out to the houses, and how is that going to change what already exists?
So every customer has a service stop, curb stop at your property line. So we'll bring the new service to your property line and reconnect it. So there'll be a slight change in the street, but on your property will remain the same.
So what do you mean slight change, the street?
I guess it'd be easy to show you on a map.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Oh, okay. It doesn't change the pressure or the water return or anything?
If you ask that question, I can answer.
Oh.
Sure. So the folks at home can hear the question.
Okay,
Sorry.
so I was just asking if it will affect the pressure, the water return, anything like
So
that?
the pressure and flow should be improved.
Okay. All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Welcome. Anybody else? Take a motion.
all right, I'll try again.
Thank you.
I move that we approve the request of Aquarion to install and maintain approximately 230 feet of 8-inch ductile iron water main to replace a section of water main on Forget-Me-Not Lane. The new main will originate at the existing 8-inch water main located within South Street and continue under the paved surface of Forget-Me-Not Lane for its entirety to the completion at number 3. This new main replacement project will replace and upgrade an undersized 2-inch cast iron pipe. Also, this project will include new water services and 1 new hydrant. This approval is subject to the stipulation of the Department of Public Works as outlined in the letter dated January 11, 2019.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Harry, while we have you here, we're going to just take you through some contracts.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Okay, we have 3 construction contracts, and the first one is with Aggregate Industries. Is this just an annual renewal of an
Yes, it
ongoing
is.
contract that we've had with the company?
That's correct.
Okay. I've voted on this now 5 times, so
So you don't have any questions?
no, I really don't.
Harry, just a quick question. Do these things ever get bid out? I mean, I know that we can extend them for a year, but at a certain point in time, is there any value in just bidding it out to assure ourselves that we're getting the best possible pricing?
We bid it out, and then we have an option, the town has an option to renew it for 3 years, each individual year. If we're unsatisfied with the pricing, we're pretty, on top of things as far as what the prices are throughout the industry. We get a fair price from Aggregate Industries, plus the quality work is I feel is incomparable to other contractors that are out there. So after discussing it with Roger and myself, we just figure it's well worth the renewing this contract.
Okay, thank you.
See anybody? Okay, I'll take a motion.
I move that we extend the contract for hot mix asphalt production and pavement installation, structure adjustment, controlled cold milling and cold planing, bid number PAV 18 to Aggregate Industries, Inc. through December 31, 2019.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Crosswalk Surface Treatment, is this a striping?
No, this is the high visibility and high friction crosswalks that are on Hingham Square, and there's one on Union Street and
Okay.
South Middle School.
Same circumstance?
Yeah, well, yes, their contract ran out when we first bid it after 3 years, and then someone else won the bid. We weren't quite as satisfied with them, but so we rebid the and Sealcoating won it on the, the last time we sent it out to bid.
Harry, how do you determine what crosswalks get that sort of treatment?
Well, this is a very expensive crosswalk treatment.
Yep.
Just for example, like one crosswalk on Hingham Square is probably about $9,000.
Wow.
They're pretty much guaranteed for 5 years. Those down in Hingham Square, anywhere from, I think, 9 to 10 years now. Some of them show a little bit of wear because of the, the pavement underneath might be cracking because of whatever reason. Could be pipes underneath there, or some, unsuitable materials. In this cold weather, has a tendency it might do that. But high visibility, great friction. When you just put paint down, there's complaints of slipperage on those, and they wear away within months, and they have to be repainted. So we did cost assessment on these, and even though initially they're very expensive, over the life of the crosswalk, it definitely pays for itself and is more economical.
So is it high traffic areas that you would utilize this treatment rather than regular paint?
High pedestrian traffic areas. We'd like to see more of them put in around the school zones.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the one at the on Union Street Fields.
Yep.
And the one at the middle school on Main Street.
Yep.
So when we do these roads, near a school zone, like maybe Foster School next year, these will be considered.
Okay.
Installing those at those places.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Take a motion.
I'll make a motion to extend the contract for Crosswalk Surface Treatment, bid number CWST18, with Sealcoating, Inc. through December 31st, 2019.
Second?
Those in favor?
Aye.
Last contract with MCI Contracting. What's this about?
This is joint building maintenance. The library's used it, I believe Town Hall's used it. It's an option for any building, the town building, for any type of maintenance, for general maintenance.
So this would be something sort of outside the normal expectation of the folks that normally maintain those buildings?
That's correct.
Okay.
Good? Mm-hmm. Motion?
I move that we enter into a contract with MCI Contracting, Inc. for building maintenance repairs, general labor contract number Building Main 19.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks so much, Harry.
Thanks, Harry.
For coming in. Okay, and now we have two proposed warrant articles. I see that the Veteran Service Officer is here, so I'd invite him to come to the table. Welcome, Mr. German and Ms. Suchecki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Town Administrator and the Assistant. Senior Chief Petty Officer German, United States Navy, also Director of Veteran Services. I have with me tonight Janine Suchecki. She is the Vice Chairman of the Hingham Veterans Council, which will be inserting this, or the proposed warrant article. I'm sure you've had time to read the article. I'll just talk about it briefly. In true military fashion, it's fastened after the BRAVE Act, BRAVE being an acronym for Benefits, Rights, Appreciation, Validation, and Enforcement. This was signed into law on August 28, 2018 by the Honorable Charles Baker, Governor of the Commonwealth. The act is part of an omnibus bill that encompasses numerous veterans-related benefits. And what we've proposed here in this part of the warrant article, its intended purposes is to provide real estate property tax relief in the form of an exemption for veterans who would have already been eligible to receive that benefit. For instance, disabled veterans within the Commonwealth, under Clause 22 of the current law, states that they're eligible for a $400 annual tax exemption if they're deemed service-connected disabled by the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's usually recognized in the fourth quarter after submitting an application through the assessor's office till, I think it's March 31st of this year. So if they decide as their life, as they increase in age, that maybe this is a great idea to put their building or their home into trust, which many people do, they then lose that benefit. That benefit goes away. But they're still, most of the time, living on the property, still residing there. They've just tried to save their investment for future, for their son or daughter, et cetera, or members of their family. So by enacting this part of the law, we're able to bestow or return that benefit that they've earned. They're disabled. That didn't change. The only thing that changed was a legal paper between the deed and the beneficiaries and the trustees. So the Department of Revenue would be reimbursing the town of Hingham at a rate of $225 for that $400 exemption.
Questions from my colleagues?
Well, I'd just like to say that thanks, Keith and Janine, and thanks to the Veterans Council. You know, we started talking about the potential for extending this tax benefit to veterans whose property has been placed in trust during the summer. We were part of a larger working group that talked about targeted tax relief. This is among those proposals. It was an act advanced by Senator O'Connor and endorsed by Representative Moschino and Murphy. And, you know, the legislature provides us actually very few tools to use in order to take care of those folks in our community who need some help in the form of property tax relief. So this is one of those tools, and I commend the Veterans Council for bringing this forward for consideration by town meeting.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll take a motion.
Where are we? I move that we, I recommend favorable action on Article R, property tax exemption for veterans whose property has been conveyed to a trust.
Second.
Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Next.
The next article, as written, is S, Article S. This article was also part of the Omnibus Brave Act that was signed into law by the Honorable Charles Baker, Governor of the Commonwealth. This article specifically was worked on by me and my office due to the 2016 tragedy that our community suffered. I felt compelled to remedy the current law, which also only allowed at this time $400 for Gold Star parents to receive off their property tax as an exemption. I was able to speak directly and work with staffers from Representative James Murphy, that's Weymouth and Hingham Precinct 2, to craft, sponsor, and pass this legislation on to the General Court for inclusion into the Brave Act. And what it simply states is this: the intended purpose of this article is to grant a full property tax exemption to Gold Star parents or guardians of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, or members of the National Guard who have died or are missing in action and presumed dead. The town of Hingham expects to receive a full reimbursement for this exemption from the Commonwealth.
You know, similar comments, right? You worked hard on this particular aspect of the Brave Act for very good reason, and again, it's in some ways the very, very least we can do. So.
Keith is known outside of this community as one of the best veteran services officers in the Commonwealth, and this is an example of why. The initiative you take, your ability to get these things done, to work through the relationships that you have, and to always be mindful of our veterans and their families. I admire so much what you do, and I am very grateful.
Thank you.
And the other thing I guess I'd say is that, you know, there are these two warrant articles that have come out of the Brave Act legislation. There are other initiatives that Keith has outlined and analyzed for the board, and, you know, you may in the future hear of, you know, further initiatives. So I also appreciated the fact that you took what was a very lengthy piece of legislation and explained to us, the policymakers, how that might impact folks in Hingham. It was a lot of work.
Thank you.
Is the Coast Guard included in this?
Yes. Yeah.
Just making sure.
It's in the further language where it clearly states who's members of the armed forces.
Didn't hear him mentioned.
Absolutely.
That's why.
Yep.
Discussion. Hearing none. Take a motion.
I'll make a motion to recommend favorable action on Article S, property tax exemption for Gold Star parents.
Those in favor?
Aye. Thank
Hey,
you.
Keith,
Thank you.
Keith, before you go, I wondered if you might just share with the audience, the Veterans Appreciation Night at the recent wrestling match.
Yes, last Wednesday, the Hingham High School wrestling match versus Pembroke, which they won successfully. Members of the Hingham High School Veterans Appreciation Club came out to honor and recognize veterans of both sides of the house, if you will. Those that were veterans or served in the military were asked to stand. They were recognized, and we were provided a beautiful rendition of our national anthem by student-athlete Nick Capodalupo there. And at that time, Senator O'Connor spoke for a few minutes, as did our liaison to the Veterans Council, Selectman Karen Johnson. And the students had every year pick a cause or a group to donate money to. They raise money all year, usually between September and March. In April, they have a meeting similar to this. They have a board meeting, and they decide where they're going to take their proceeds and put it to a veterans-worthy cause. In the past, they've put it towards equestrian therapy for PTSD and TBI patients in a local establishment down in Bridgewater. Years before that, they were instrumental in kicking off, as Mr. Asher would know, being the treasurer for our ad hoc committee for the Corporal Orlando Scholarship. They put the first money in, the first $500. They thought that was a tribute to a classmate of theirs. This year, they knew that there was a crisis with the federal furloughed workers, specifically the Coast Guard men and women that protect us here at Point Allerton and all the way down to the Cape. They felt that the need was great at this time, so they immediately rallied. They held their meeting. They were able to take their donation of $750 and put it in the Mass Military Foundation, which directly supports Coast Guard's men and women in District 1. So that money would be used to offset like food pantries, gift cards, fuel cards, things of that nature, heating relief with those families that weren't having any income in the last month. And that will linger on, even though they've been paid half. They've all been paid at this time half of what was owed. That will linger on for some time. So even if the government remains intact over the next 3 weeks, they'll still be behind for a little while.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Next item on the agenda. This is a joint session with the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee. And we're going to discuss and receive recommendations of the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee regarding the purchase of the water system. So just a few ground rules so we can proceed on this smoothly. Mr. Asher and Mr. Krumholtz, Mr. Siegfried, Mr. Beerworth, Mr. Higgins comprise the committee. We anticipate hearing a report from them, at which time this board will have a further discussion. Following that, this will be open up to public comment. To the extent you wish to speak, please raise your hand. When called upon, come to the podium, address your questions to the chair. I'd like to give everybody that wishes to speak an opportunity to do so. If the comments start to appear repetitive, I'll politely speak to that, but that's where we're going. That's how I'd like to do the evening. So with that in mind, thank you all for coming. And Mr. Asher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Water Company Acquisition Study Committee is here tonight to fulfill the charge voted by the Board of Selectmen at its 11 December 2018 meeting. As I'm sure you'll recall, at your 11 December meeting, the board charged the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee to review available information gathered from its areas of investigation and report back with a recommendation. As you can see from the slide, that charge is the logical culmination of the committee's work dating back to its formation, founding at Town Meeting 2012. Town Meeting 2012 authorized the Board of Selectmen to investigate the feasibility and advisability of acquisition of the water company. The board appointed the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee to perform that investigation. The committee has met and published thousands of pages of documents, minutes, presentations, etc. on the town website, including the financial model that Ed Siegfried and I have periodically updated over the past 6+ years at the request of the past and current town administrator. Following the conclusion of litigation in March 2018, in-depth work on the governance and engineering phases resumed. Summarization and discussion of all the work done to date has been the focus of the 4 meetings this month, starting with the third-party expert reviews of the town's financial model on 10 January. Since financial analysis was the first phase of the committee's work, I will now ask Ed Siegfried, the phase leader, to summarize the results of the investigations in that area. Ed, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, John. Good evening. On January 15th, as part of a Water Company Acquisition Study Committee meeting, I presented an update on the financial analysis work done to date, including a review of the history of the work and where we are today. I'm going to briefly recap some of the more significant financial points I presented that evening. John, would you put up the first slide, please? In 2012, we started by reviewing Aquarion's DPU rate case filing and also had 3 meetings with Aquarion. As a result of this work, we identified almost $7 million in Aquarion costs that could be eliminated under town ownership. Once we understood their cost structure, we were quite certain that a town-owned water company could operate less expensively. The only significant unknown was the acquisition price. In April 2016, the court issued a ruling stating that the price would be $88.6 million as of December 31, 2013, using a formula that would allow for the price to be rolled forward to dates in the future. The $88.6 million price was $37 million higher than Hingham's price and $103 million less than Aquarion's. The price rolled forward to December 31, 2017 using the court's formula is $103 million. Rolling it forward another 16 months to April of 2019, when town meeting might vote on the purchase, the price is estimated to be approximately $107.8 million. In April 2017, Aquarion filed for a rate increase for Hingham, Hull, and a portion of Cohasset known as Service Area A. In December 2017, Eversource Energy acquired all of Aquarion for $1.675 billion. In February 2018, 11 months after filing the initial rate increase and 2 months after being acquired by Eversource, Aquarion applied for a new capital surcharge called a Mains Replacement Adjustment Mechanism, or MRAM for short, that would be added to its rate increase. Finally, this past December, the DPU approved an 11.9% rate increase, bringing Aquarion's total base revenue for Service Area A to $13,047,168, with an effective date of November 1, 2018. The DPU also approved the MRAM surcharge, which will appear as an additional charge on water bills starting September 1, 2019. Included in the $13 million in Aquarion revenue were many of the same types of costs that we identified back in 2012, which could be eliminated under municipal ownership, including Aquarion profit, water treatment plant lease costs, depreciation. These 3 items alone total $6.6 million, or 51% of the total approved revenue, exclusive of the MRAM surcharge. The eliminated costs could be redeployed to more than cover town borrowing costs to acquire the water system. Next slide, please, John. This past November, the town hired 2 financial firms, Anderson Tax and Berry Dunn, to review both Hingham's and Aquarion's financial models. The expert report from Berry Dunn stated that the town's assumption of a 10% Aquarion rate increase every 3 years appeared conservative and reasonable. Based on the history of Aquarion rate increases in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire, all of which had annual rate increases higher than what was used in the town's financial model. Next slide, please. Jim Dondero of Anderson Tax reported that the savings for ratepayers under town ownership over a 31-year period, 2019 to 2049, would be almost $50 million in savings, not the $40 million in higher ratepayer costs that Aquarion had been claiming. The $50 million in savings did not include the additional Aquarion MRAM surcharge ratepayers will pay starting this September. Starting in 2049, once the acquisition debt is paid off, the savings under municipal ownership would increase by $7.4 million each year. This slide shows graphically the green line at the bottom representing the growth in municipal costs, and the blue line representing Aquarion's costs for the 31 years, 2019 to 2049. As you can see in the chart, the town costs start off substantially lower in 2019, Aquarion costs substantially higher. In 2035, 17 years from now, when the water treatment plant lease expires and it's renewed at a substantially lower rate, the lines kind of cross down. But eventually, in 2049, when the acquisition debt is repaid, the savings amount to $7.4 million, the municipal savings amount to $7.4 million per year. Some of the key factors and assumptions that Anderson presented were, first, the initial debt would include the purchase price of $107.8 million plus $1.5 million repaying Hingham's fund balance for the litigation and study costs, all to be financed over 30 years with 1 year of short-term borrowing and 29 years of long-term level payment debt at a rate of 3.75%. And secondly, in the Anderson presentation, annual infrastructure capital investment was input at equal amounts for both the town and Aquarion, starting at $2.7 million per year to 2022, and then increasing 5% every 3 years, reaching $3.7 million by 2048. The capital in the Anderson model of town costs is funded with 20-year debt, starting at 3.5% and increasing 25 basis points every 3 years. Thirdly, town outsourcing of system operations and maintenance based on cost quotes, plus additional costs including a water system superintendent, administrative support, and other municipal costs, growing all of these costs annually at a 3% inflation rate. Fourth point in the Anderson model, all of the municipal costs would be paid from water rates through an enterprise fund, not from real estate taxes. With respect to his observations about the Aquarion financial model, Mr. Dendero noted errors, including depreciation, the interest rates used, and the water treatment plant costs Aquarion had used in their model. Correcting for these errors increased Aquarion's costs to ratepayers by $106 million over 31 years. The Anderson model also reduced the savings presented in the town's July 2018 model from $136.9 million down to $49.8 million, an $87.1 million reduction. This reduction in savings was due primarily to two factors: an additional $16 million of municipal capital expenditures, and secondly, $71 million resulting from the compounding effect of using a lower average annual Aquarion revenue rate increase. The Anderson model used 7.1% compared to the town's July 2018 model, which used an average increase of 8.06%. Mr. Dendero also noted that the use of a 10% rate increase for Aquarion every 3 years, equating to just over a 3.2% compound annual growth rate, is less than Aquarion's historical compound annual growth rate since 2005, which was higher at 3.5% in Massachusetts, 3.3% in Connecticut, and 4.3% in New Hampshire. Dendero also informed the town that there were no errors in the town's financial model, only different assumptions and approach used in the Anderson model. There is still more to be done over the next 3 months, including a detailed review of the Anderson financial model and determining the exact price of the water system rolled forward to April 2019. Based on all of the work done over the past 7 years, I believe that there will be financial savings to the ratepayers if Hingham owns the water company. However, it's not just about the finances. The next slide, John. As I said last week when I voted in favor of the motion to recommend purchase, I believe it's time for Hingham, Hull, and a portion of Cohasset to join with 337 other communities in Massachusetts that own, operate, and are served by their publicly owned water systems. Only 14 communities out of the 351 are served in whole or in part by privately owned water companies like Aquarion. 337 out of the 351, that's 96%, are publicly operated. 96% is a compelling, impressive number. Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset, 3 of the current 14, should join in with the other 337. Aquarion Eversource does not want to sell, as evidenced by its repeated and expensive full-page newspaper ads, robocalls, mail flyers, forums, and public relations effort, all aimed at trying to convince people why municipal ownership is a bad idea. Aquarion Eversource run their business primarily to benefit their investors, not the residents of Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset. To an investor-owned water company, it's not just about water, but also about profit. Profit's not a bad thing. An investor-owned business should make a profit. But should a profit be made on selling us water? That's the question I'm asking. In 2006, Macquarie paid $860 million for Aquarion in 2006, and then 11 years later sold it for $1.675 billion to Eversource, almost double what they paid. Think about that. Who will own Aquarion 10 or 15 years down the road? Aquarion has had 3 different owners in the last 15 years. A municipally owned and operated water system is not about making a profit. I believe our town, as it does with other systems and services, can do a very good job owning, governing, operating, and improving the water system with continuity and consistency. That's why I voted in favor of the motion to recommend purchase. That concludes my remarks. You're welcome.
Thank you, Ed. I'd now like to ask Josh Krumholtz to summarize the work done on governance.
Thank you. Can I just cite to Ed? Because I think that covered a lot of it. That was good. Thank you, Ed. So from a governance standpoint, again, we were looking at it from 2 perspectives. One was, are there any barriers to governance or in the governance field that would suggest that this is a bad idea? Too many challenges associated with it. And if that's not the case, what were we seeing in terms of governance by way of suggestion to the Board of Selectmen as to ways to go forward if the town decided to go forward with that capacity? So what we did, if you can go, is in terms of research that we did, and the we goes beyond just the people in this committee, other volunteers helped as well. We talked to a number of towns, including other towns that themselves served other towns, so multi-municipal systems. We looked at some of the legal requirements involved, talked with town council, met with representatives of both Hull and Cohasset, spoke with Mass DEP, and looked at various state statistics to try and get a handle on these governance issues. And what we found, which Ed has alluded to, if you go to the next slide, is we have 2 slides on this. It's really startling, frankly. The white in this slide represents all the towns that are served by publicly owned water systems. The blue, to the extent that there's blue up there, is Aquarion, 13,000 of which, 13 of the almost 20,000 of which are service area A, which is us, Cohasset, and Hull. And then you have a couple other, another 13,000 customers serviced by other private companies. So when you look at it on the whole, now about 60 of those, I think, are MWRA, which is, if you could decide what they are, in terms of, they're clearly not private, but they're kind of a hybrid. But the clear takeaway from that slide, right, from that information, is that the vast, vast, vast majority of towns are handling their own water system, which tells you that we're the outlier on the one hand, and on the other hand tells you that, you know, this is certainly doable from a governance standpoint, from a town standpoint. Next slide. So we looked at it then more specifically with regard to our cohort, and by that, I mean, we are a medium-sized system. We have about 13,000 ratepayers. So medium-sized is between 10 and 25,000 accounts. There are 41 such systems in the Commonwealth, and we are it. We are the outlier. We are the only system of our size that is being run by a private system rather than a public system. So again, a clear message that this is not only doable, but perhaps just on that information alone, advisable. What we also saw was, so I'll talk about structure in a moment, but you have elected water commissioners kind of at the top of the structure. We also looked at that there is the ability for the towns to either have separate elected water commissioners or to have the water commissioners be the mayor or the board of selectmen. What we found is that in the 41 systems in our cohort, 39 of them opted with either the board of selectmen or the mayor acting as the water commissioners, and as we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, we think that from a day one standpoint, that is what makes the most sense for the town of Hingham, again, to the extent the town decides to move forward. What we also found was that the vast, or I think I used this word last time too and pulled it back, the majority, it may be the vast majority, of the towns also were servicing ratepayers in other towns, right? So one of the questions from a governance standpoint is how problematic is it that we have these whole ratepayers and these cohasset ratepayers? Does that create significant barriers? What we found is it's very common, and talked to a couple towns, and there were really no issues. I think that the town, as the owner of the system in those instances, as I think would be the case here, would be all ratepayers are the same. It doesn't really matter where the geography is. I think an issue was raised at one of our meetings that it may be the case that there are more ratepayers outside of Hingham than there are in some of these other instances. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but you know, having thought kind of hard about it, it's hard to figure why it matters. Even if that is the case, there's nothing unique about this system or the way it's set up that would suggest that there would be unusual challenges just because there might be more people outside of the town proper rather than less. One thing that was also raised on that subject in terms of the structure was an issue was, I'm going to talk about the overall structure, but there are different kinds of structures out there. And one of the other options, well, let me do this way. Let's do the next slide. Okay. This represents what we've been thinking about as a committee in terms of an overall structure. The town of Hingham would be the owners, and the water commissioners would be the board of selectmen on day one. So we just thought about this from a day one perspective, and I think it's very important to understand that it is a new venture, and you're going to learn as you go along, and it may be that you want to make changes when you, as you learn, but what should it look like on day one? There was a question raised at one of the other meetings whether we should have a water district with regard to Hull and Cohasset and Hingham. There are towns around the Commonwealth that have combined to create water districts and operate in that fashion. And I had indicated for those who were at prior meetings that, you know, we had looked at that and discarded it, but frankly, I couldn't remember why. So I went back and looked at why. And water districts typically arise when you have multiple towns that own their own water systems and decide for efficiencies they want to get together to create a district where they're going to pool all of their resources, right? That's the kind of, so if Hull had its own system, we had our own system, and for whatever reason decided we wanted to join them together, in that instance you create a water district. It's really kind of apples and oranges here. This is not the kind of situation where you create a water district because all the ownership would still be under one town. So what we contemplate is you have at the top of the pyramid the water commissioners represented by the Board of Selectmen. I think it makes sense in this instance for it to be the Board of Selectmen because We got to hit the ground running. The Board of Selectmen are very close to these issues. They've been following for a long time. And I think they're in the best position to be able to make the transition occur as smoothly as possible. And as I talked about a couple minutes ago, this is by far the most common approach that is being done for towns, at least in our cohort. Now, having said all that, you'll see on the right, we have this transition committee recommendation, which is a group appointed by the Board of Selectmen. I didn't put the number up there. You know, it could be whatever the board view is appropriate, three to five, probably something like that. But there is a lot to be done if we're going to go forward with this. I mean, you're talking about transitioning from a private company to public ownership. You're talking about RFPs. You're talking about hiring a superintendent. You're talking about hiring companies. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think it would be a lot to put on the selectmen to ask them to do all that. And we do now have, you know, a body of knowledge in this town from this process, embodied in certain individuals, that we think it makes sense to prevail upon more volunteers. The guy who's put in thousands of hours laughing to my right, and have them work with the Board of Selectmen and report to the Board of Selectmen and work with the water superintendent to help with all the many things that would need to be done on the transition. But that would be, as the transit name suggests, a transitional committee that would not necessarily continue on unless, of course, you saw a reason for it to continue on. We, of course, below the selectmen have the town administrator, because the person we contemplate as part of the structure is a water superintendent who we would view as would be a town employee. So that town employee, would be reporting to the town administrator as all town employee, kind of like a head of a department here, essentially. So would be reporting to Tom as the head of the department. That obviously is a critical person. That person has day-to-day responsibility for making sure everything is running smoothly. They'd be interfacing with the management, the operations and maintenance vendor, which I'll talk about in a moment. They'd be interfacing to the extent necessary with DEP, with DPU, making sure that everything is running smoothly, working with, the DPW in terms of road openings and things like that. That's the day-to-day job. That person needs to be properly certified and qualified and credentialed, or whatever those words we want to use, to make sure that everything is being done properly. But having said that, really the day-to-day running of the facility, of the system, we would envision, at least again at the beginning, to be an operations and maintenance vendor. So you go out and contract with companies that do this, and there are many companies that do this. We know, because we've had a couple provide numbers for us that we've been using in our financial models, starting with the, right in Cohasset right next door, that there are companies that do this. So they would be really running the show, and they would be providing all the professional responsibility and oversight. And I think one thing you guys, we've talked about and you should be thinking about is, in the RFP, expressing a preference that they hire what would be former Aquarion employees, so that you'd have the smoothest transition possible. That is something, as I understand, we can do in an RFP, put in that preference. Obviously, it would be one factor among many, but that would certainly be desirable to get those quality employees continuing to work for the project, for the system. Below that, below the operations and maintenance vendor, we have the capital vendor. Now, that could be the subject of separate RFPs, separate people, separate companies. But I think what's important, and the reason we structured it this way, is that it's important to have that capital vendor reporting to the O&M vendor, right, so that they can manage that person. That's not thrown on the superintendent to do and have all those responsibilities, but you have a kind of upstream process for making sure that all gets done properly. And the last category there is the Citizens Advisory Board. We would recommend, and of course it doesn't have to be this, but we would recommend a committee of 5, 3 Hingham, 1 Hull, 1 Cohasset resident. We would contemplate that they would contribute to and provide input on the rate-setting process, which I'll talk about in a moment, perhaps handle in the first instance any complaints or concerns that individual ratepayers have. That obviously helps with transparency and helps the Board of Selectmen, acting as the water commissioners, have direct interaction with the community and the concerns being raised in the community. The next slide, John. So the biggest piece here, aside from the financials, that I think is attractive about this approach is the rate-setting process. Right now, rate setting is set through DPU. DPU does act as a protector of the town's interests on some level. It's a matter, I think, of legitimate debate how well they do in that regard. But that is there. But the DPU process, while public, is incredibly opaque. It is not remotely conducive to citizens showing up and participating. While they do post all of the relevant documents, they post them in thousands upon thousands of pages, I think just by date, correct, John? Making it impossible to find anything. So in theory, a public process, in practice, not a public process. It also is an adversarial process where money gets spent and arguably wasted, with both sides taking respective positions with regard to what the rate should be, and money that could be saved if you don't have an adversarial process. What we would propose here instead is really pretty much our process for any budget or any cost for the town. So we would, it would be a bottom-up. The water superintendent would make recommendations with regard to rates and budgets, including capital. Somewhere in the process, the Citizens Advisory Board would be weighing in. All those recommendations would be made up to the Board of Selectmen, acting as the water commissioners. There would be public hearings, local public hearings here, where people can talk and provide input. And it would go through, just like any other budget, the rate recommendations would go through Board of Selectmen and Advisory Committee to make recommendations at town meeting. The difference would be that this would be more like sewer at the end of the day. The actual authority to set rates sits with the water commissioners, just like it sits with the sewer commission. So what town meeting votes on would be advisory only. It would be recommendations, because that's just the way the law requires it. But otherwise, I think you're looking at as transparent a process as you could have, in contrast to the opaque process that we're dealing with now. So, in conclusion, in terms of where we ended up as a committee, where I ended up as a committee member, I mean, we have, the vast majority of towns controlling their own systems. That is, to me, the most demonstrable piece of information in judging whether governance through municipal ownership is appropriate. By doing this, we would have a much higher level of transparency for all the reasons I just talked about. You have a much higher level of accountability on rates and budget setting. It would be, set by the people who everybody here gets to vote for every couple of years, and you have local meetings and the opportunity to speak. To Ed's point earlier, there is just the reality that with private ownership, you have profit motive. And you have shareholder interests, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way businesses work. But those can be in conflict with municipal ownership, where the only interest is setting the rate that the ratepayer would want based on the needs of the system. So you just take inherent conflict out. And also to Ed's point, that there is just a public interest in owning our own water system, right? I mean, there's a reason back in the 1800s the town reserved through special legislation the ability to pull back the water system. And I think there's a reason that virtually every town in the Commonwealth controls their own water system. I mean, we can't control the water supply. That's still controlled by the state and would always be controlled by the state. But controlling the water system, like, there's a lot of talk about Aquarion. I don't think this is like an Aquarion issue. This is just that, as Ed said, 5 years from now, Aquarion may not own it, Eversource may not own it. It could be somebody else with their own set of interests, and they may or may not diverge with ours. But if we own it, we know we're going to be effectuating our interests all the time, as consistently as possible. So for that reason, from a governance standpoint, everything we saw really profoundly pointed toward town ownership.
Thank you, Josh. Finally, I'm going to ask Bob Higgins if he would please summarize the work done on engineering.
Thank you. I'm Bob Higgins. As part of my work addressing the water system engineering, I have reviewed Aquarion's latest publicly available capital study and plans, Aquarion filings with both the Department of Public Utilities and Department of Environmental Protection Regulations, Aquarion's latest rate case testimony and exhibits, and town information concerning its road building program. I've reached two conclusions from their analysis. Aquarion's capital plans and studies have provided a clear roadmap over the past 11 years for what needs to be done. Aquarion just hasn't consistently spent the money to implement those capital plans. Also, there is an insufficient coordination with Hingham's road building plan to prevent the reopening of roads recently rebuilt and repaved. Following is Aquarion's own representation of the water main. Next slide, please. As Aquarion's own data shows over the past 13 years, is it replaced less than 1/3 of what its own capital study directed for aging water mains that are near or past the end of their expected useful life. As it is current pace, Aquarion's own testimony to the Department of Public Utilities, main breaks are going to increase dramatically over time as a large portion of the mains inventory exceeds the reasonably useful life, resulting in the need to spend significantly more money on addressing leaks and breaks. Those water main breaks have two impacts: homeowner and business safety risks due to the lack of water for fire suppression, increased costs for both taxpayers and ratepayers to repave roads, and after emergency street openings to repair failed mains. The history of street openings for emergency water repairs just in Hingham of streets that had been repaved and were under the town's 5-year moratorium from reopening make this point well. Next slide, please. This chart shows just how Hingham's history relative to protecting the taxpayer investment in street repaving over the past 7.5 years. Since 2011, 22% of the streets that have been repaved in accordance with the Hingham Town Engineer's public plan were reopened sooner than the 5-year moratorium due to emergency water main breaks. So more than 1/5 of the repaved streets had to be reopened and repaired at both taxpayers' and ratepayers' expense, when better coordination by Aquarion with the town would have prevented that additional expense by replacing aging mains when those streets had been opened for repaving. Hull has just implemented a similar road building program, so now the need for close coordination by the water system owner is even greater. Okay, lost water is reported annually by each water system in the Commonwealth to the DEP. Since unaccounted for water represents water withdrawn from the environment unnecessarily, further stressing watersheds and wasting an increasingly precious resource. The DEP standard for water systems in the Commonwealth is 10% unaccounted for, 1 gallon out of every 10 unaccounted for. The average unaccounted for water across water systems in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is 13.4%. Aquarion's UAW for our water system hasn't been less than 15% for over 8 years and has been as high as 23%, almost 1 gallon and 4 unaccounted for. Just to put Aquarion's 16% unaccounted for water for 2017 in perspective, that amount of water loss, 183 million gallons, almost the entire volume of water withdrawal from Acord Pond in 2017, okay, of 187 million gallons. That lost water is roughly equivalent to 3/4 of Acord Pond's full capacity. That's a high environmental price to pay for failing to invest in the capital necessary to replace the aging water mains and leaky water service connections to homes and businesses. I think all of us are aware of the discolored water events in both Hingham and Hull this past summer that made the Boston Evening TV news and the local newspapers. This summer's events followed a series of discussions and communications between the towns of Hingham and Hull with Aquarion dating back to 2016 as to when and how often Aquarion was going to flush the entire water system. We don't have a clear understanding of Aquarion's system flushing for those years prior to 2016. The bottom line, the penalty of not performing system-wide flushing each and every year is, among the other things, discolored water. I would just like to insert my own opinion here on this one. The bottom line, every 2 years is fine, because you get half the system a year, and that's water permitting. As you're aware, we've been in a semi-drought and a drought over the last several years, and you don't always have the water that you need to do the flushing that you need to do, but you need to talk about it, you need to tell people, and pick it up where you left it off when the water is available. Sometimes you can adjust your flushing schedule, okay? So that's my opinion. Bottom line, the penalty for not performing system-wide flushing each year and every year is, among other things, discolored water. Annual system-wide flushing should be a customary best practice and not a newsworthy event. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. In summary, the committee took the following action at its meeting last Wednesday evening, 23 January. The committee voted unanimously to recommend that the town exercise its statutory rights to purchase the water system serving our 3 towns. With that vote and the summaries that you've heard, which led to the committee's action, I believe that the committee has now fulfilled the board's charge from your 11 December 2018 meeting. I thank you, and that concludes the committee's report.
Thank you, John. Before we transition to the next part of the discussion, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for the time and the dedication and effort that you've put into this. It's a privilege to have the kind of caliber of effort with us on this generationally important issue before the town. At this time, I'll take the clicker.
There goes the power.
That was emasculating.
All right.
I actually think the message here is be careful when the Board of Selectmen call you to serve on a committee.
That's right. Keep the clicker.
We thank you for coming nonetheless. Okay. At this time, we're going to have a further presentation, and Mr. Mayo will start. So take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, so there was some discussion recently, and certainly over a number of months and perhaps even years among the leadership team and others regarding the issue of transition and how that would work from private ownership to public ownership if the town were to vote like that. So to that end, we have a very brief presentation that each of us will speak to a component of. I'll kick it off with just a summary statement that the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee held several public meetings and has completed its review. Based upon that review, the committee voted unanimously to recommend that it was both feasible and advisable that the town of Hingham proceed to exercise its statutory right to purchase the water system under Chapter 139 of the Acts of 1879 as amended, as we just heard from John. So that said, again, each of us is going to have a very brief presentation. So I think we'll start with the financial elements, and Mary.
Yep. Good evening, everybody. And what I'd just like to do is to represent sort of Team Hingham Town Finance transition And this group really was made up of our town administrator, Mr. Mayo, our town accountant, Sue Nickerson, our treasurer-collector, Jean Montgomery, and our town financial advisors, Richard Totora and Janet Morley from Capital Markets. They're the financial advisors that have served the town so well over the last 20 years. And what I bring to the party, I have an MBA in finance, and I actually worked in acquisitions for a Fortune 50 company for several years in my career. What I'd just like to do is to highlight some of the transition activities that we in the town have been undertaking really for about the last 6 or 7 months leading up to tonight's vote. We understood that the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee had a charge, which was to determine whether the purchase of the water company was feasible and advisable, but we also understood that there would be a lot involved in transition, and that in fact some of those transition activities would also inform a decision. So, you know, there's a lot of work that goes behind each of those bullets, but I'd just briefly like to highlight each one. So here are all the steps that we've taken prior to town meeting. First of all, the town completed the litigation to determine the purchase price to acquire the water system, and that litigation concluded in March of 2018. The next thing we did was to review the purchase and the financing of the water system with our financial advisors and with our bond counsel. With respect to our financial advisors, we wanted to understand a couple of things. First of all, we understood that there were different ways that we could finance this particular acquisition. We could use general obligation bonds. We could use revenue bonds. We understood that there were differences in the terms that we would use. And over the course of the summer, our financial advisors prepared information, we held meetings, and the culmination of a lot of that work was something that they presented to the Board of Selectmen this past August. And located on the Water Acquisition Study Committee page, there actually is a presentation that was made by Capital Markets. Mr. Healy, if I could just interrupt for a moment, could you please clarify for the audience the regulations of the town with respect to videotaping proceedings of a meeting and giving notice to the board if any members of the audience are doing that?
Sure. If there's anybody out there videoing this meeting, you got to identify the fact that you're so doing. I think I saw somebody doing that earlier. So if you're doing that, speak up and identify yourself accordingly.
Thank you. Just going back to some of those meetings with the financial advisors and bond counsel, another thing that we wanted to understand is what sort of information with respect to the acquisition of a water company would the investment community need? And that's both potential investors as well as the bond rating agencies. And you may recall that during the summer, there were a series of documents that the town put together on the background of the acquisition, the financials, the governance, the engineering, and a lot of that was put in mind not only to educate us as community members, but also to provide to the investment community. And we did that in conjunction with guidance from our financial advisors. Next, over the summer, our bond counsel issued a written opinion to the board indicating that the town has the authority to issue bonds to complete the purchase. We wanted our bond counsel to look at the statute, to look at Mass General Law, and again make sure that what we were proposing to do could be done. Another important thing that we've done at several times since March is to validate our interest rate assumptions with our town financial advisors. The town's financial model is currently carrying a long-term interest rate assumption of 3.75%. And periodically, we ask our financial advisors, if we were to go to market today, what would that rate be? And in fact, we asked them that question earlier this week. It was either Monday or Tuesday. The days are kind of getting blurry to me this time of year. But what our financial advisors told us is that for a AAA community like Hingham, if we went out to market today, that the long-term interest rate for us would be 3.1%. So the interest rate we're carrying in our financial model is 65 basis points higher than current market rates. And again, we've been monitoring that to make sure that the interest rate assumptions we're using are valid. The other thing that we did, and we had 3 calls during the month of November, Our rating agencies have been aware of the possibility of the town purchasing the water company since the inception of the feasibility study in 2012. As a matter of fact, it's been a footnote in a lot of the rating documents. It always does come up, and the rating agencies see it because they get a copy of our warrant. So they see, hey, you guys are spending money to study the feasibility of your water system. So this hasn't come as a surprise, but we thought, you know, again, going into the fall, as we're getting to the point where we might make this decision, we thought it was a good idea to have a more substantive conversation with the rating agencies. We wanted to answer their questions. We wanted to hear what they would look at. We wanted to understand what information requirements they had. And again, our finance team held calls with all 3 rating agencies in November. Again, the highlights, not a surprise, very expected. They've dealt with this with other communities, as Josh mentioned, and the rating agencies understand, you know, which is what our town financial advisors have been telling us for quite some time, that the rating agency perspective is that the revenue that comes from selling water to ratepayers is used to pay off the debt. And so they look at this, again, as a self-contained kind of an enterprise. I think what we found, again, to summarize those rating agency calls, is that it confirmed much of what our financial advisors were telling us. And again, I would direct you to this presentation on the website because I think it explains it in a little bit more detail than I'm doing right now. Following that, with the assistance of town council who's seated at the table, we drafted a warrant article for the board's consideration this evening to authorize the purchase and the borrowing. We also town council drafted a warrant article to authorize the enterprise fund from which the water company would operate. We have 2 items to do. We have to establish a water system enterprise fund to collect all revenue and pay expenses. And one element of that is that by March 1st, the board actually has to vote a budget for the upcoming year. There's a requirement that happen 120 days in advance, and we've also been in contact with the state and the Division of Local Receipts to make sure we understand the budget level detail that's required so that we can provide the necessary detail. And then the other piece, you know, you've heard us mention $107.8 million as the approximate purchase price for April. We actually have to roll that forward, and to the extent that the board takes action tonight on warrant articles, the finance team's recommendation is that we ask town council to actually contact Aquarion to do that. That's a process where we would need to do that. So these are all the steps that we've taken over the past several months. What we're really trying to be focused on is understanding what has to be done before town meeting, what needs to happen, and is there anything that we can get started on. Should town meeting approve the purchase, the town has to finance and complete the purchase. We've asked bond counsel and our financial advisors for a schedule of dates which we've received that indicate all the necessary steps. And I would not be able to do this credit. Jean Montgomery is really our expert here because she works with our financial advisors to go out to market on many different things, but the issuance process would follow kind of the similar activities. Information would be provided, a draft statement, rating agency calls, putting it out to bid, the board would have to accept it. So again, we understand all those steps, and what we've tried to do is understand whether there would be any unique aspects given the size and nature of this transaction, and we think that we've identified those and we're prepared to carry them out. So that's about 5 minutes of what's really taken about 6 months to do.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you, Mary. I will give a very brief overview on some of the transition plan regarding the operations and engineering, and then we'll follow that with Karen. We'll do that with the governance plan. Okay, so some of the issues that we're dealing with prior to town meeting is that we've completed the litigation to confirm that the water treatment plant is in fact part of the purchase. We have met with the DEP, several staffers over there, to identify statutory requirements. We have obtained from the DEP the Technical, Financial, and Managerial Capacity Review Summary, which is a fancy way of saying a checklist that covers all things related to how to run a water company. So we have that document. The town has reviewed the existing engineering and capital plans for the water system. Those are, to list some of them, the Tater and Howard reports from 07, 11, and 14, the Canoe report, the DPU submittals, and Aquarion's 5-year capital plan. The town has engaged a transition expert. I'll speak briefly to this gentleman. His name is Bob Gollage, and Bob has an extensive history working in this field. He started out as a conservation agent in the town of Dartmouth back in the 80s. He then joined the Mass DEP, where he worked for several, I believe, close to 16 years through the Wetlands Protection Program, the division, as a director of the Division of the Wetlands and Waterways. He was chief of staff at Mass DEP, and culminating in a regional director position as a staff person, and then ultimately as a commissioner for the Mass DEP. He was then appointed in the Romney administration as the secretary of the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, and is currently the principal at Gollage Strategies and Solutions, LLC. Bob will be tasked with assisting the town through its transition process. So, as has been pointed out, we are not all experts on all things transitions related to transition of a water company. So now we have one that is, as was our plan. So the next step would be the warrant, or the next thing we did was the warrant article authorizing an appropriation for transition costs has been drafted again by town council, and that would be considered as part of the vote tonight if the board so chose. Post-town meeting. This gets a little small. I apologize, trying to keep it on one slide. So if town meeting were to approve a question of purchase, if it gets that far, Aquarion would continue to operate the water company during the transition period as legally required under what is referred to as a good husbandry standard. So I'm just going to turn it over to Town Council John Coughlin for a few minutes to explain to all of us what the good husbandry standard entails.
Sure. So just a brief overview. So under Section 11 of Chapter 139 of the Acts of 1879, the town of Hingham has the right to purchase the corporate property and all the rights and privileges of the Hingham Water Company by a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So the courts in Massachusetts have interpreted these kinds of purchase rights, and they have interpreted this right to purchase as what they call a continuing offer to sell by Aquarion Water Company, and the town meeting vote would be considered the acceptance of the offer. So at that point, upon passage of the town meeting vote, there's a binding contract that exists between both parties. The purpose of this special act is to allow the town of Hingham to purchase a water system that is a going concern in full operation, so that a necessary public service should not suffer interruption or impairment during the period of transfer. The final closing, however, can occur several months after town meeting when the purchase price is paid and the assets are transferred to the town. So it's during this transition period where this legal standard of good husbandry comes in. So during this transition period, Aquarion is legally obligated to continue to operate the water system under the good husbandry standard. This legal obligation is clear under existing case law in Massachusetts and was recently confirmed in the DPU decision dated October 31st, 2018, approving Aquarion's recent rate increase. If you look at pages 81 through 84 of that DPU decision, you can see where the DPU has laid out the obligations that Aquarion will have during this period of time, so that after town meeting vote, the lights are not shut off, the water does not stop running. There's a transition period where Aquarion will continue to operate the company until the town takes over ownership. They're aware of those legal rights, they have an obligation to those legal rights, and that's what will happen during that transition period until the town finally closes. The good husbandry standard requires that this water system be operated by Aquarion as a going concern without any interruption during that transition period. The water treatment plant must continue to be operated and must be preserved and kept in repair. Insurance must be maintained. Service to existing customers must continue, and service may also be extended to new customers in the normal course of business. New capital investments, large capital investments must be avoided unless they're necessary to preserve the plant or prevent interruption of service. So during that time, the idea is no big new capital investments until the town takes over. Aquarion must not withdraw unearned profits. And all of these obligations can be enforced by a court, and the town is entitled to an accounting of all the income and expenses during this transition period. So that's what happens between town meeting vote and what you generally refer to as a closing date. And those obligations are clear in case law, they're clear in DPU decisions, and both parties will abide by that until the transfer is ultimately completed.
Thank you, John. So again, we're in the small print checklist under post-town meeting. Item 2 would be the town would issue an RFP and select a vendor to manage and operate the water system. The town will also coordinate with Aquarion and the selected vendor to transition the management and operation of the water system at that point. And the town would review, update, and implement the capital plan for the water system. We would hire a vendor to create a consolidated and updated capital plan at that point. So those are some of the operations and engineering items, and I believe Karen has a presentation.
Yeah. I just want to go on record, going last, I actually had a few checks on these other pages that I would have put on my page, but all right, that's all right. Because I do think that there's an operational piece of this transition and a governance piece of this transition, and there are some places where those two kind of concepts, come together. And so, I think as long as we get a check mark next to them, we're doing okay. So, as Josh said, and as he said tonight, as he said at prior committee meetings, as we started off discussing back in September, one of the foundational elements to understanding water company governance was doing what we always do. Well, what does everybody else do on this front? And, the resounding answer to that question is the model that, you see before you tonight, where, number one, the town owns the system, and, number two, by and large, the executive branch of governance is responsible for the system. One of the I think, pieces of accountability within the organizational chart that Josh showed was the professional management of the water operation by the water superintendent, the professional supervision of the water superintendent by the town administrator, and then the overarching policymakers and citizen input, coming from both directions up the chain. So, I think you saw that model evolve, which is, again, what we do here in Hingham when we have a complex task in front of us. We start out and we learn as we go. And I think the organizational structure that Josh has presented tonight both takes account of kind of an ongoing citizen presence for the Citizens Advisory Board, as well as, I think, taking advantage of the talent that we have in town to continue to help us to manage through the task. So, we stress tested, I think, the governance models used by other municipal water systems to see if that, try that on, see if that fits in Hingham. And I think that the model you see before you does and is consistent with, by and large, almost all of the medium-sized water systems. And I would say, by and large, the other municipally operated, leaving MWRA out, the other municipally operated water systems. We have drafted, when I say we, I mean John Coughlin, has drafted a warrant article authorizing the Board of Selectmen to act as the water commissioners consistent with Massachusetts general law. We will establish with our new Human Resources Director the position of Water Superintendent within the confines and parameters of our personnel bylaw. That job description is going to be essential, I think, to the proper functioning of the water system, and I have great confidence in the professional staff that we have to do just that in terms of establishing that new role in town. And then, the other piece of this is I talked with I've talked a couple times with Phil Lemnios from Hull and Christina from Cohasset, Kevin Richardson from Hull, and Diane Kennedy of Cohasset about, kind of moving this forward in a cooperative manner. We've had very productive discussions in that regard. I think they have seen the governance model. They endorse the governance model. I frankly think they're looking forward to this possibility, but they understand that this responsibility lies with the Hingham Town Meeting. So we will continue to communicate with our neighboring towns, again, as the process rolls forward. But, all of my conversations, I think all of your conversations, because you've had many more conversations at the staff level than I've had, I think all of those conversations have been very productive. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Mr. Lemnios came and spoke at one of your meetings, sort of endorsing that general view. And then post-town meeting, the governance plan we would need to we'd need to post and hire for the superintendent position. And, here's where I think having a professional who understands this sort of transition management process, that's another place where I think that expertise would be brought to bear on the governance or management side of the system. We would work with Hull and Cohasset to establish the Citizens Advisory Board, asking for recommendations from their Board of Selectmen to the town representatives you saw represented tonight, and we would go through the talent bank process to identify potential citizens volunteers, again, just like we do for everything else. We would assemble the transition team and come up with a charge, again, like we do with all other committees. And we would work, I think, with the DEP to develop water policies. Many other towns, if you go on their website, Cohasset, for instance, has water policies. And so we would, I think, as a governance matter, move to consider what policies I think would be important for Hingham to have. So, I think a lot of thought has gone in, and a lot of diligence has gone into constructing a governance model that is both responsive to the citizenry, but is also a responsible steward of the water system.
Thank you, Karen. Before I open it up to the public, I'd just like to thank my colleagues for their hard work and dedication on this very important subject. At this time, we'll entertain questions or comments from the audience. Again, just to go over ground rules. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. I'll call on you. Come to the mic. Identify yourself by name and address. If it's apparent that a lot of you want to speak, we'll put a time limit. We'll put a time limit on that, which would be comparable to the time limits established at town meeting. Yes, Mr. Mullally.
Michael Mullally, 14 Cushing Avenue. I'm glad you still have this slide up. I'm curious about the warrant article authorizing the Board of Selectmen act as water commissioners. Should the town vote against that warrant article, would that mean we'd have elected water commissioners?
Yep, that would be great. Sure. I was having my snacks.
Yeah, no, that would not be automatic. Somebody would have to make a motion.
No, he's not.
Okay.
Well, I suggest that we have a warrant article to have elected water commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Mullally.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. O'Hare.
Jim O'Hare, 11 Heron Lane.
Good evening.
Good evening, gentlemen, ladies. In light of all the slides that have come up tonight and the dissertation that we've heard, we can all appreciate this is an enormously complicated transaction. It's going to be the changes to the town are going to be significant. From a financial point of view, we're going to take on initially something approximating $110 million of additional financing, a general obligation bond. It'll approximate $180 million or so versus the $68 million that we have now. We're also going to undertake a totally new management structure. In other words, a structure run by people, and responsible people, I'm sure, who basically have no foundation in this business. And I respect everybody's ability and their success in their own businesses, but this is an enormously complicated business. It's up and it's running. And then we're going to transition also to maintenance and operations. We don't know who's going to do that. We do know that at this point in time, we have very good water in Hingham. So from a ratepayer's point of view and from a taxpayer's point of view, it seems to me that there are a lot of unanswered questions in this transition. It'll be significantly different. There are 190 some odd miles of pipe underneath the streets of Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset. Who's going to take care of those? The pipes are old. The town is taking a risk, in my opinion, from a financial point of view, from an operational point of view, and also from a management point of view. With good water, is this worthwhile? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Can I just respond? I guess I'd say a couple things. One is, you know, the DEP standards remain in place regardless of who owns or operates the water system. So, you know, you heard Tom talk about the sort of checklist that the DEP has. We've met both with folks from the Southeast Regional Office on multiple occasions and had phone conferences with central office staff. You know, the town has got to be in a position to operate it in accordance with DEP standards, and that would include the water treatment plant. The reason we have good water, or great water, frankly, is because of all of the money that we're paying for the water treatment plant. And the water treatment plant is specifically included in our purchase. And with respect to the management function, you know, I went through and I've got a list of all of the 41 communities in our cohort that run their water system. Pittsfield, Agawam, Westfield, Chicopee, Shrewsbury, Attleboro, Taunton. I would stack Hingham's ability to manage this through a professional water superintendent against any of these guys. So I hear you, and I understand that that there will be a transition factor, but I guess I take exception to saying that we're in a situation where it's sort of a you know, uneducated sort of person who, or people who would undertake the transition.
I respect your thoughts. Both Scituate and Hanover have big problems right now, and it's from a maintenance point of view, is my suspicion. In other words, they have not maintained the facilities, and I think that's the key to get to the point that you're addressing, in other words, the quality. This system has been maintained. They have won awards, as we all know, and it's a selective award.
Okay,
so
I got to jump in here. So I met with the DEP guys a bunch of times, right? And I brought up this award because I was like, this is an award. And the award, there are levels of awards, right? This award is an award that says, essentially, you're doing your job. So that award was also won by Chicopee, by Framingham, by Lexington, by Revere, by Dedham Westwood, by Quincy, all municipally operated systems.
A very small percentage, I might add, of the existing water companies in the Commonwealth.
Well,
is that
I only looked at our specific cohort, and I only looked at it for a period of time. The other thing the DEP guy said, because I actually asked that question, and he said, well, you know what, the municipalities don't, you have to put yourself in for this award, and the municipalities don't tend to do it because the award, they know what they're doing. They're operating, and their ratepayers are satisfied, and their citizens are satisfied, so the award thing is not a big deal. So he said there are a number of communities that just don't participate, even though they're on this list and potentially could be award-winning. It's not a metric that matters to their, you know, to their functioning, right?
Well, I guess my point is, we do have good water.
I don't disagree with you.
We have been commended for it. and that's a good thing. And we have a risk in the change, in my opinion, that may not continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I just want to add that I actually attended one of the public meetings in Situate last summer when there were a lot of issues of discolored water. And it was really interesting, and to me, my conclusion was that the issues in Situate really didn't arise because they were municipally owned, but really it was in how the water system was taken care of. And the big factors that are contributing to the issues in Situate, as I heard them that night, was the lack of a consistent flushing program and significant underinvestment in water mains. And, you know, everybody's entitled to your opinion, and Mr. O'Hara, I respect where you're coming from. I got to tell you that when I walked out of there, I felt like Hingham is on the path to what I saw at that meeting in Situate with what I know about the flushing program that's taken place and when I look at the investment in water mains. In my mind, there's a risk in maintaining the status quo that, you know, I guess people maybe look at it a little bit differently. I'd also just make one point with respect to debt, because there are a lot of big numbers that are floating around. And I would sort of direct people again to this page in the work that was done in August. Right now, the town has $68 million of outstanding debt, and that's the debt, okay? And our borrowing capacity is $333 million. Think of that as your credit limit. And so that means that right now we have $265 million in our legal debt limit that's available. And in fact, under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 8, any debt that's issued for the purchase of a water system doesn't count against our debt limit. Now, we'd still be taking on $108 million worth of debt, and that's a big number. But it's not counting against our debt limit, and I think that's important because I've started to hear people talk about, well, we have a lot of capital needs in the town, which we absolutely do. And when we talked to the rating agencies, we listed them out, and we talked about $75 to $100 million of potential capital projects for fire stations and Foster School, because we want to know we want to understand how the rating agencies are going to interpret that. But I think it's worth noting that, you know, what we're paying for the system is $108 million. You know, it's like when you take out a car loan, you buy a car for, you know, $25,000. When you go to sign the loan paper, it includes the interest. And, you know, I don't know about you folks, but when I always see that number, you know, you get like a little pit in your stomach. But, you know, in Hingham, when we've talked about capital projects historically, we talk about the amount of debt we're going to issue, and then we talk about the impact on property taxes. So like with the middle school, we said $32 million worth of debt, and our property taxes are going to go up by, I would think it was about $300. In the case of the water system, we would be purchasing it for about $108 million, and the impact on property taxes is zero.
And I guess the other, maybe say this a different way, right? The Water Acquisition Study Committee was charged with finding showstoppers. So instead of kind of coming out of the box to say, you know, let's purchase this thing, and if something bumps into us along the way, we'll stop. That was not the way this proceeded. It was, let's find something that's going to make us stop. And so and maybe that's why it took you guys so long, I don't know. But they sort of inched along like, okay, is it safe here? Yeah, is it safe here? Is it safe here? And in my mind, right, I've simplified the question for myself. One question is, can we afford it? And the other question is, can we do it? And on the can we afford it front, if the answer had come back from capital market advisors and said, well, you can do it, but you can't borrow another dime for anything else in the municipality, right? So taking on this water system would cripple your ability to operate as a municipality. To me, we can't do it. And that's not the answer here. It's just not the answer. This debt will be fully satisfied by the water rates that we already pay. So anyway, that's mine.
Yes, Mr. Watson.
evening. Jim Watson, 291 Rockland Street. I want to congratulate everybody on an amazing process you've gone through. I'm just wondering, is it essential in the article to commit ourselves to the hiring of an outsourced operating firm? I can see it's one solution. It's been done elsewhere. Brockton does that with the sewer plant. But where we have an experienced staff in place, why not give the transition period a chance to see if they can keep on running it under the direction of our water superintendent and with access to consultants, you know, for unusual problems. But I'd hate to see the whole staff gone, you know, committed to replacing everybody if we don't know yet if they could continue to run it under our superintendent. And again, thanks for your efforts.
Sure. Sure.
Thank you, Jim. So the water company RFP, the operating RFP, would be likely to be a 3-year window. So the intent here is a year one solution would be that we would hire an O&M, outside O&M vendor for a 3-year window to give us a sense of what our long-term plans ought to look like. And as far as the Aquarion, the current Aquarion staffers, I think we heard earlier that there would be an intent to the extent feasible and likely through procurement, we would include a preference that those employees who currently work at the Aquarion shop would in fact maintain those jobs under the management of the O&M vendor.
Good. Great to hear that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes, Mr. Olson.
Good evening. Thank you. Steve Olson, Director of Operations at Aquarion Water Company. I would just like to correct the record on the DEP award question and answer. I just want to assure everyone here that there's no application for that water system award. We've received it a couple times. There's been no application filled out by Aquarion or any other water system. It's given. Thank you.
So you're right, but you have to put yourself in a position to receive it, and by doing that, DEP said there are dozens of winners. The award means you're in compliance with the regs. You've had no violations for the last 5 years. You test for a secondary contaminant, and you have a water ban, and we meet those.
And what % of water systems qualify for this award?
Well, what he said to me was that there are dozens of water systems that comply, but if you haven't closed out your file on some old letters, then you're not considered.
Steve, I looked on the DEP website, and it looked to me like the award that we've received is for medium and large size water systems in the Commonwealth, of which I believe there are 41. So, this idea that we got selected out of 300, however many communities, my read of the DPU website is that this specific award, there are different awards that the DPU offers, and this one is exclusively for medium and large size water companies. And by my count, when I clicked on the little thing on the DPU website, I think there were 41 of them.
Yeah, actually you're incorrect, and there is no application for that award. Thank you.
Okay, but the DEP guy shrugs his shoulders and says it's essentially, it's an award for operating the way you should operate. So for instance, you didn't get it in 2015 because you had a notice of noncompliance.
Oops. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Olson. We've got to get on.
Have a great evening.
You too. Lady in the back. Identify yourself by name and address, please. Thank you.
I will. Good evening. My name is Mary Farrington, 25 Tower Road. And with all due respect, I take exception to the statement that we have good or great water in Hingham. Anecdotally, a lot of my neighbors, a lot of my friends have purchased water filters for their homes, for their faucets. And a quick look of the Environmental Working Group's website identifies 8 carcinogenic contaminants that Aquarion water is above the state and national levels for. So when Aquarion held a meeting, a public meeting at South Shore Country Club a few months back, I asked the question and I was brushed off. And I would just like to suggest that the selectmen or the superintendent or whomever is in charge of making sure that our water is great or could be great, take a look at those numbers and identify what we can do to bring the contamination down.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir, in the back.
Richard Norman, 3 Shoot Avenue. Yes, the author of several documents which I've submitted to the selectmen and others. I have a couple of questions for tonight, which I'd like to address either to Mr. Siegfried or Selectman Power. The green line that you showed from the Anderson report, which is a forecast of town rates.
Direct your questions to the chair, sir.
I'm sorry?
And direct the questions right here, and
Oh, I'm
figure
sorry.
it out from
Okay.
there.
I have a question about the green line that was used with respect to a projection of future water rates. There was a reference made to the financial update that was presented in July of 18, and I'm quite familiar with that. I can turn to a page and I can see the debt amortization schedule for purchase debt. I can see the debt amortization schedule for the debt which was allocated for capital projects at $2 million a year. Is there such a financial update in existence today which properly reflects the change in debt that is now being used in the financial projection, and also a change in terms of the amount of debt which is going to be necessary to support capital projects, which I believe are significantly different from what's in the July 18th statement? So is there such, there was reference made to a town model, and has that town model been updated in order to support the green line of the projection of water rates?
Is there a second question as well?
With respect to
questions?
financials? Yes.
You said you had 2 questions. What's the second one?
Well, I have 2 forms of questions. One is financial. The second is with respect to governance. The related question with regard to the financial model is what basis is being used to support the green line with respect to the assumed operating expenses for the town.
And what is the second question?
Second question relates to governance, and a concern that I have with respect to the town of Hull as opposed to Hingham. And as you are, I think, aware, frankly, I oppose the fact that the selectmen would act as water commissioners. And there was an issue that was raised during the study committee hearings as to whether or not Hull could rely upon the fact that it would have the same rate structure as Hingham would have. And related to that is whether or not, as Selectman Johnson's governance proposal indicated that there would be a formal agreement between Hull and Hingham as a part of the governance, whether or not that document either exists or will exist.
Okay. Let's take the first question first, then. Who would like to
So I
speak
could
to that?
I could just let you know that that the model, we received the model today. It'll be posted to the website tomorrow.
Well, this is the Anderson model or
The Anderson model.
Yes, but my question is, because the Anderson model is one thing, but we have a form of town model that the Selectman Power referred to, and also the study committee. I think it's a pretty simple matter to adjust that in terms of the forms of debt and whatever the assumption is on operating expenses, and I don't think it exists at this time, and I think it should.
Yep, well, and so I think what Mr. Siegfried and Mr. Asher pointed out last week at one of the meetings is that they are effectively out of the modeling business at this stage. Mr. Dondero has built a model. We received it today. It will be available on the town website in the morning. And, you know, I think that these 2 gentlemen have spent tens of thousands of hours modeling, and I just don't think that it's a good idea for them to try to reflect his model in their model. We're going to have a lot of confusion. Mr. Dondero's model is the analysis here, and that's what we're carrying forward.
Let's go to the issue of governance, then.
Okay, so I understand 2 questions. Am I right? Just the formalization of the relationship with Hull and Cohasset, that's your...
Yeah, well, it relates, I mean, it starts out with the fact that there's a substantial difference in terms of the condition of the water system in Hull and Hingham, and a question down the road as to whether or not there would be a disparity with regard to the required capital improvements. And if there are, then I think the town probably has the legal right to put two rate structures together if it wanted to. But a specific question was directed at Mr. Asher during the study committee hearing, in which I believe the town manager for Hull asked, would the rates be the same? Okay. And the answer that was given was yes.
John Coughlin will address this.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess Mr. Coughlin will address this in part, but a ratepayer is a ratepayer. And so, yeah, I guess I would not be aware of a legal basis to, within Service Area A, to differentiate among...
See, from a business perspective, and this is what gets into the political aspect, because there may come a year in which Hull may require $3 million or $4 million of capital assets or capital expenditures, and Hingham may have either none or a very, very small amount. And I think that down the road is something that potentially could turn into a problem. And that's why, personally, I think a written agreement between Hull and Hingham is something that is desirable and I think really essential, because we're talking 30 years.
Would you care to respond?
Yeah, not much to add, other than we look at this as a single system. This
Right.
is a Service Area A.
Right.
We're purchasing the system as one comprehensive system, even though it goes across town lines, and that the rate structure would be uniform across.
And you know, to Josh's point earlier, I mean, that systemic view of intermunicipal water provision, where some towns that we looked at have a bulk meter at the line. So, you know, if Hull had its own water system, potentially Hingham could deliver water to the line. There'd be a bulk meter, and we would sell in water, and then Hull could distribute the water itself. And some towns do that with other municipalities. Some towns also, and there are some towns that do a combination of these things. Some towns also have customers in other municipalities, and they follow a uniform rate structure. So, you know, if you look at it, I guess, another way, right? We've all of the ratepayers, whether you live in Hingham, Hull, or Cohasset, have all been paying into this system for a long, long time. Okay. So, you know, we all have shared in our collective costs, including the cost of the water treatment plant. So I think that's the way, at least on day one. So we've talked, and you probably heard this attending the Water Acquisition Study Committee meetings. We've talked a lot about what we need to do in order to purchase and run the water system on day one for, you know, let's say a 3-year period of time. As that operation and management and governance evolves, you know, we may do something very different as this unfolds. But I think we're putting ourselves in a solid position to do just what we're explaining tonight, to purchase it and run it. Can we afford it? Yes. Can we do it? Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Norman. Appreciate your time. Yes, Ms. Burns.
Laura Burns, 479 Main Street. Thank you to the committee for all your years of work. It's appalling. I can't believe you did that. Thank you. I just wanted to respond with a couple of my thoughts about some of the things that we've heard. There was a concern raised about putting these fine people in charge of something that they don't know anything about doing, which is running a water system. But I know that these fine people can be elected without knowing anything about emergency response, without knowing anything about how to maintain roads, without knowing anything about building codes and construction and how to enforce those codes. All that you're required to be able to do is hire the people who do know those things and oversee their work. And I know we appreciate here in Hingham that all of those things run very well. You're very good at it. And if you look at the proposed governance structure, you'll hire a water superintendent who does know about running water systems and who will oversee from the town's point of view the work of the contractor who will be overseeing the water system and will do what they do because that's what they do. And that is how we do things here in Hingham, and we do it very well. So I'm not too concerned about that. If people are worried about whether or not there will be enough maintenance for the system under town ownership, they should take a close and careful look at the financial model, which shows clearly that the town will have much more free cash available to put into maintenance, which is part of the plan, than Aquarion will in future, if only simply because the town does not have to pay returns and profits to shareholders, because the town doesn't have any shareholders. We are us, and we can use our money to maintain our water system instead of shipping it out of town to people who, other people who own the water company, who are not us, which is what we're doing right now. And with respect to the rate structure, a ratepayer is a ratepayer. That's true now. If in Hull, there's some tremendous need for maintenance that goes above and beyond what we're doing here in Hingham, and Aquarion owns the company. A ratepayer is a ratepayer, and the DPU is going to allow Aquarion to equally divide that burden across all of the ratepayers, and nothing will change in that regard. So maybe it would be nice if you could, but that's the way it works, and that will be true no matter who owns the water company. And finally, on the question of elected water commissioners, I would like to point out that under the proposal of the Board of Selectmen, we will have elected water commissioners. We elect our Board of Selectmen. And I also know from sitting in that seat that there are a lot of people who are unaware in this town that there are other elected boards in charge of things that the Board of Selectmen are not in charge of. For example, if someone calls up and says, there's a huge construction project next door and there are a bunch of rats, and I need you to do something, then when I was sitting in your seat, I might have to say, did you know that we have an elected Board of Public Health? And they answer to you, not to me, and you have to call them? And usually the answer is no. So I actually think there is much greater visibility and much greater transparency and much greater responsibility to put the job of being water commissioners, at least for the start, on the Board of Selectmen. Because that's who people are going to think is in charge anyway. I know that from experience. But I will note that at any point down the road, next year, the year after, town meeting can do whatever it wants to do with the governance of the water company. And I would encourage the Board of Selectmen, when your transition committee that you propose, to take some time to spend a year looking at all the models that are out there and deciding if this is the right one for us, or if something that some other town is doing is what would work better for us, or maybe, as Hingham sometimes do, we'll think up something completely new. But at any point now, in the next year, the year after, for a century after, we can change the governance of the water company at any time. We don't have to be nailed down to whatever we decide at this town meeting. But I think it is a really excellent proposal to begin as you have suggested. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Claypool.
Hello, Libby Claypool of AdCom Water Subcommittee. We've just taken up this issue, so I think this is sounds like since you're opening potentially the warrant tonight, this would be the appropriate time to ask a couple of these questions that I thought maybe we'd be dealing with next week, but we may not have that opportunity since tonight's the possible opening of the warrant. A couple of things I had on my list as far as updating the financial model. That's something that the town has put forth as our long-term plan for the purchase of the water company. And so from my standpoint, that should be updated and with whatever assumptions from the Anderson model the town decides to adopt. And I think the only issue really was the amount and the growth of CapEx. So I don't think that should be a onerous task to go back, and if the water committee the WASCA, whatever, is now out of the model business. That is still an active model that's under the ownership of the town administrator. So I would say that that's an update, given the magnitude of this purchase, that should be made so that the town has this long-term capital plan for this purchase. And along those lines, I think as part of what I think one of the warrant articles indicated was the operating, and I think it's a capital plan. I don't know where that slide is, but you know, so I would think just like every other department that we have on the capital side, there'd be a specific, including sewer, a specific 5-year capital plan, project by project, so that the voters know what is going to be anticipated specific projects for 5 years, because that's what's in the warrant currently every year, including the sewer department. So I don't know if you want me to go through all my questions, Chairman, before I...
You have 4 minutes and 11 seconds.
Okay. Tick-tock. My second one is intermunicipal agreements. The lack of those, plus a general obligation bond, equals liability for the taxpayers of Hingham that are the owners of the water company. So I personally think there needs to be warrant articles for the intermunicipal agreements, because I think that the taxpayer of Hingham need to know what responsibilities they have to neighboring towns. Hingham has an intergovernmental agreement and a license agreement with Hingham Municipal Light, and that's within our own town. We also have intermunicipal agreements with the surrounding towns that are in Shrek. So to me, I guess to use the terminology of the Water Committee Studies group, that's a showstopper as a taxpayer, that we wouldn't have those agreements and know what liability the town's exposing ourselves to if something went wrong. I mean, that is really a showstopper. And I think the lack of that, given that the debt we're talking about is general obligation debt, is definitely an issue. I would love to get more information, as an aside, if we meet separately, which I know you will be meeting with the Water Subcommittee, on the not going the revenue bond route. That gives protections to the taxpayers and keeps all the burden within the circle of the ratepayers. And so I know that probably has some additional responsibilities, potentially has to go to a referendum. It would need legislative approval, but it protects the taxpayers of Hingham from liability. Also, I think currently, from what I am understanding in the marketplace, the spreads between revenue bonds and GO bonds used to be much larger, but the demand in the marketplace right now is more for revenue bonds, so that spread is narrower now than it's ever been. So I don't think that additional interest rate that the town would have to incur would be material. And I think given the liability risk to the taxpayers that could be eliminated by going that route, I think it's worth considering. That may have been discussed with CMA, but I, as a member of the subcommittee, would love to understand what that logic was and why that was abandoned and they went the GO route. And I think that's it. So I don't know if there'll be any answers tonight, or we're having a subcommittee meeting, I believe, next week to get some answers on these. Because the intermunicipal thing, if you're potentially opening the warrant tonight, I mean, that's something that if you don't get it in now, when's the town going to have an opportunity to get that on the warrant?
Intermunicipal agreements do not require town meeting approval. They're not relevant to a
But as
warrant.
part of a purchase of this scale, don't you think that that would be appropriate to allow people to see what agreements there are with other towns?
It's just not the way you handle an intermunicipal agreement.
Does the town plan on issuing them, even if it's not part of a warrant? Does the town plan on entering into intermunicipal agreements with Hull and North Cohasset?
No.
No, not at all?
No, not in that format.
Wow, okay. All right, thanks.
So just, I want to mention, because, you know, with just procedurally here, for those who are familiar, tonight the board will be taking a vote on whether or not to open the warrant and insert warrant articles, but then there will be a series of warrant article hearings, and in fact, Next Wednesday night, the advisory subcommittee for this particular warrant issue will be holding a public meeting that will be posted. If the Board of Selectmen inserts warrant articles, we will actually hold warrant hearings, and then the full advisory committee will also hold hearings. So there will be a number of different public events that will be coming up over the next several weeks that will give an opportunity for questions, for comments, for further discussion.
We do have another item on the agenda following this discussion, but before we conclude, is there anybody who'd like to speak? Yes, Ms. Tully.
Melissa Tully, 29 Back River, and I have to say I liked hearing Laura Burns' new address when she came up here. She's moved. I just want to thank all of you for the incredible amount of work that you've put into this. We're so blessed in this town to have people that have the professional experience that you guys do and the willingness to put your free time into hours and hours and years of work in addition to the selectmen. I think it's always hard when you've put that kind of work in to have, and you have done all of the homework that it takes to layer in to come to where you are, to have those questions come at you that probably were some of the questions that you asked 2 years ago and came to a conclusion and moved forward with where you are today. I think it sounds like an incredible opportunity for the town. I heard someone use the word generational. We do many things at town meeting that are not about our immediate future, but our long-term future, when we buy open space, when we build schools, and when we buy water companies for our children and our grandchildren. I think this is a critical decision for the town and one that we should move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Burbank, would you like to speak?
I just want to back up. Faith Burbank, 17 Andrews Isle, Hingham. Back up the comments that Liz made and several of the others made. The work that you put into the organizational structures is gigantic, and the years you put into it. And I've learned a lot tonight beyond the documents that I've read, and I'm impressed with what you're all doing. My points, I sent a few points to you that had been gathered from the Watershed Association and folks from other communities that were just quickly put down. And they really, as I see it at this point, are probably policy questions and come under governance. And the main concern was how do we protect the environment at this particular time as it regards to the water flow in the Ware River. And as you all know, that's challenged most summers. And we've had droughts that have left wildlife stranded or dead or what have you. And I know that Aquarion has tried to figure out ways, especially this past year, to regulate the withdrawals and the weather and the climate and put it into a perspective so we wouldn't have the drawdown, but we still do. We still have the drawdown. So, you know, where is it in terms of a priority? Our river, it happens to be the basin from which we get our water, is a central landmark for our whole community. We are fortunate to have a wonderful aquifer. And I took great confidence in the fact that, I think you said Bob College, you would?
College, yes.
College, okay. And who certainly comes with a great deal of background, understanding of ways to address this and make it a priority. I guess my concern in the other environmental is this a priority for the rest of the town, besides those that are environmentally bent? So, and when policies are being made, can that be taken into consideration, that the wealth that we have here and how can it be preserved at the same time balancing out the withdrawal needs. And for the public that may not know this, the Ware River was designated, thanks to Kurt Schultz and Samantha Woods and others in DEP, put together or got us on the stressed river list, which gives us another layer of considerations for protection for our water resources, underground habitat, and flow to the bays, Massachusetts bays. So we are gifted with some regulations that do protect us, but having the will and the policy from the local level is very important in moving forward. And it's been one of my investments in the past few years that we put some attention to the natural resources we have here and protect them. So I don't know what the vehicles will be in the future to kind of follow that path and to pull those that are concerned of this from Hull and Cohasset and Hingham together to, I think you'll probably get the direction going with your new council, but if there's a vehicle for doing it, I appreciate knowing.
Yeah, so, you know, I thank you for your thoughtful comments, as I know we all do, and you know, we get caught up, I think, in the kind of in the major aspects of the acquisition, right? And then you think, well, okay, well, what are the policy outflows from that? And so I guess, so to speak. So I guess there are a couple things I would say, both from a policy standpoint and a practical standpoint in town acquisition of the water system. I mean, you know, one of the things that I guess I'd actually be excited about is it would all be under one roof, if you will, right? So you'd have the town controlling the operation of the system and setting policy for the system without the need to produce a return for shareholders, right? So we can then just operate the system as the statute requires, which is in the best interest of the town. And the way Massachusetts law then delineates that best interest is, part of what it does is capture the coordination of the water commissioners or the policymakers with other policymakers in town, including policymakers on the Conservation Commission, policymakers on the Board of Health. The DEP regulations discuss the acquisition of land to protect the watershed, which I think this community has made a priority for years, and I'm looking around this audience, seeing a number of people who have dedicated themselves, both in terms of private philanthropic efforts as well as, you know, town acquisitions of open space to protect the aquifer. You know, I think Aquarion has stepped up from time to time in that regard. I do know that Aquarion in the past had been approached to help with acquisition of land adjacent to the watershed and was, you know, not willing to participate in that. I think again, the town as the policymaker would have that opportunity, as you suggest, and the accountability within the public budget process in terms of not only revenue in but expenditure out would be part of those conversations. And I think on a practical level, and my colleagues are better able to speak to this than I am, on a practical level, I think the investment in our infrastructure also goes a long way in helping us attempt to address the stress on the watershed, right? If you're making withdrawals that you can't account for, you're pulling water out, number. And nobody's using it. You know, if we can repair the pipes and tighten the system and account for every drop we're pulling out of the watershed, you know, it strikes me that that's another tool to use, I think, to make sure that we're doing the best by. It's our water resource, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And to me, you know, when Ed was saying and Josh was saying there's a public interest in this acquisition that goes beyond all the graphs and all the numbers, you've really hit the nail on the head, I think, when it comes to that. So thank you for your time.
Actually, someone from Cohasset has suggested, why aren't we collecting our winter runoff and spring runoff and holding it to disperse gradually through the summer dry months, as they do in other parts of the country? I think I wrote that down as, but that seems like something, but that would, again, involve a little money to put it together. But the returns, I would think, would serve us in the long run. But At any rate, there are a number of ideas that can float. Thank you very much for all of your work. Very much appreciated.
Yes, sir.
I'll be brief. Hi, my name is Adam White, 32 Eldridge Court, and the Hingham Water Supply Committee. Just very quickly, I want to make you guys aware of something that's been going on in our every few months meeting with Aquarion. There's a couple of projects to help bolster our supply. Now, we have spent the last few years trying to bring down unaccounted for water to the best of our ability, hold them accountable, and it has come down. To get 13%, 14% is very tough to do. They have been working on a few capital outlay projects, and to hear that it might take 3 years in transition with no ability to actually put money towards things like this, whether it is to capture rainwater during the winter months, to use it to keep the environment a little bit more friendly, whether it's exploring new options for more water. Right now, we're about 90% usage. That means that 1 or 2 years of drought, and then someone steps in. We've been very lucky to have that come down. Environmentally, we've been lucky with a lot of rain, but we don't actually have a lot of leeway. So we're in what I would call a red zone. If we have 1 or 2 years of drought, we are in trouble. That is not uncommon knowledge. That's public knowledge. To have 3 years where we can't look at something that would take 6 to 9 years to implement, whether it's a new source, whether it's going to Brockton, different options. I just would like to make sure that you're aware that it does take time to implement things like this, and that there is something within the warrant that can say, if there's a long-term plan that needs enacting now, that can be done. Aquarion has started work on some of those projects. They have done a lot of the research. I would definitely behoove the board and the committees to be able to say, we want to be able to use that, or at least, piggyback off of it. So just to make you aware, things do need to start happening now, and it goes beyond 108 million, 110 million, 115 million, but just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And sir, you're referring to a 3-year transition, and I don't think any of us envision that a transition would be 3 years. I think we're thinking that a transition period would be a number of months. So that period in which, in which the good husbandry applies, we would see as a matter of months, and it would be our intent in year 1 to continue to implement the Aquarion capital plan for this year until, as I think Ed or John mentioned in their slides, we could sort of do our own capital assessments. So I would view that as any capital activities that are starting in 2019 would continue.
And the 3-year reference was the initial hiring of the water vendor would be for 3 years.
Okay.
So that's, yeah.
It's what we're looking at. It would not be inexpensive. We have not been given numbers on this, and we have pushed Aquarion for it. So it would be nice to see faster turnaround on being able to say, in the next 5 years, we're going to need X amount of dollars. So that is, behoovement to actually having the town do this, like you said, all under one roof. But it is something, and it is a sizable, I can expect it to be a sizable number. So when you are looking at, going for a GO, to be able to understand that there might be a, capital outlay within the next 2 to 3 years to actually begin that. So just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at this point in time, I think I'd like to thank everyone who got up and spoke for the respectful exchange between the residents. Thought this was a positive discussion. I think at this point it's time.
Yeah.
We're going to make a motion to adjourn, as much as we're interested in.
Thanks a lot.
I would accept the motion to adjourn for the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee. All in favor? Aye. We stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your service, gentlemen.
Tune in when you get home, all right?
A glass of whiskey.
So,
rubbing it in.
Before our board votes, I just, I want to make a couple of comments because It's been interesting that I had the honor while I served on the advisory committee of being the liaison to the water company, and then while having the privilege to serve on your board of selectmen. This is an issue that I followed for 7 years, and it's interesting, but as I think about all the different issues, this one to me seems the most consequential, and I hope regardless of how any of us individually feel about this issue, I hope we can all appreciate that all of us have been given this a lot of time and a lot of thought, and what we've really been trying to do is to apply the same disciplined, thoughtful approach that has served this town so well for a very long time. And, you know, as I think about this, we have a really long-standing tradition in Hingham of controlling our destiny, and, you know, we do that with our zoning bylaws. Our zoning bylaws say how we control development in town. We operate an ambulance service in town, which not a lot of communities do. We have an affordable housing trust that has oversight for the Lincoln School apartments, which, you know, is not something every community does. And we own and operate our electric and sewer utilities. And, you know, as I think about this, just a couple of things. I think the governance model, and thank you for your work, Karen, on that, I think it's consistent with all the water companies of our size, but I think it leaves the door open for town meeting to make decisions down the road about how it wants to operate. And frankly, I like that because I think there are a lot of possibilities. Do you combine it with electric? Do you combine it with sewer? Do you put all your utilities under one roof? Do you keep them separate? I like the idea that we have the flexibility on that. You know, in terms of the operating model, I think it gives the town a chance to do something it hasn't been able to do for 130 years, and that's to decide who operates and manages our water system. I mean, you know, we haven't had the ability to do that, and I just, you know, to me, something kind of happened this week that to me encapsulated. It took like all 7 years of all this stuff, and it really just boiled it down. So here we go. You know, we've mentioned a few times that Aquarion has commissioned capital improvement studies with an outside vendor called Tata and Howard. And so when they do these capital studies, it lists a list of projects and it prioritizes them. So in 2007, a priority one recommendation was to replace the water main on Downer Avenue from Governor Andrew Road to Planters Field Road. That was in 2007. Wasn't done. 2011, another capital plan, Tata and Howard. Downer Avenue from Otis Street to Planters Field Road was prioritized. Wasn't done. 2014, another update from Tata and Howard. This time Downer Avenue was listed from Otis Street all the way to 3A. Wasn't done. This Monday, our DPU, members of our DPW team, noticed that there was some water accumulating on Downer Avenue when they were out, you know, clearing the roads. There was a water main break on Downer Ave in the area that had been recommended as a priority one replacement in 2007, 2011, and 2014. And the water service had to be shut down to make the repair. Since Foster School was in the affected area, the repair was delayed until after dismissal. And, you know, we get these updates. So on Monday night at about 8, I can't remember what time, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, we get a notice saying the repair is taking longer than expected because of the cold, which is understandable. But, you know, here I am sitting in my living room thinking, is Foster School going to be able to open tomorrow? Are we going to close the school? Where are we going to put the kids? How are we going to communicate this to people? And it's like 8 o'clock the night before, and we got a lot of working parents who, you know, kind of have trouble when things like that come about. And anyway, the good news was that the main was repaired, that the repair was completed that night. Foster School operated. And, you know, you ask yourself, well, why wasn't the water main replaced in 2007? Why wasn't it replaced in 2011? Why wasn't it replaced in 2014? Interestingly enough, during those 3 times, our water system was owned by 3 different companies. It was owned by Kelda, it was owned by Macquarie, and now it's owned by Eversource. And by the way, during that 10-year period of time, our water rates have increased by 40%. So there's just kind of something wrong here. And I mentioned it before, but to me, you know, there's a lot of talk about risk now. And I think, frankly, you know, there's a little bit of an effort here to kind of scare the community. I think we need to think about the risk that our water company would get sold again. I think we need to think about the risk of bigger and more frequent rate increases, because I really do believe that Aquarion's kind of been on its best behavior for the last 7 years, and I'm not sure that a period of 6 years with no rate increase is something we can count on. I think there's a risk of continued underinvestment in capital, and as Ms. Burbank put it, you know, we've got the risk that an essential service and a scarce resource is managed by a third party that, you know, at times doesn't feel as accountable to us, the ratepayers, as we'd like. You know, I'm not against corporations. I've worked for a few. I work with many of them. But I think that there are times when the fiduciary responsibility and the responsibility to the ratepayers and the customers here aren't always in line. And if you're a good corporate citizen, your first accountability is to your shareholders. And that's not a bad thing. And if your first responsibility is to your shareholders, you're doing a good job. But in a lot of cases, it's at our expense. So, you know, for me, there are clearly financial benefits, and while that's kind of my orientation, I think the ability to control decisions related to how our water supply is managed and how our water delivery system is managed, you know, those are priceless benefits for our community. And, you know, I think it's time to insert these warrant articles into the warrant and make our case to town meeting.
She said it all. It was really well done, Mary. Thank you.
Is there a vote?
I'd just like to chime in a little bit if I could. As a younger man attending the town meetings, I always had great respect for the older residents who voted for the construction of new schools. Their children had grown and had left the system, but yet they took the vote because they knew it was the right thing for the community to do. And this is a vote that I plan to take with an eye towards the future generations of this community, of this town. We see what we have. We can have a better alternative. The next several weeks, months are going to be rough. We're going to be dealing with a concerted effort by a determined corporate entity to resist this. This is a profitable enterprise. I respect their right to resist, but we have to do what's right for this town, what is in the best interest of this town. So when you're reflecting on all of this, I would ask that you please remember that, because you know the work that we put in to present the argument to you, it reflects thousands of hours of your fellow citizens who are volunteers in these roles. We have nothing to gain by this at all. We just want to do what's right for the town. This is a step that we're taking tonight. We're not taking it impulsively or rashly. We've looked at this from all angles with some incredibly bright people who flank me on either side, who are sitting in front of me there. We're extraordinarily lucky. We have an opportunity. I voted to litigate this matter, to join the issue. We've joined the issue. This is the time. I'll entertain a motion.
List. I'll make a motion to open the warrant for the review and insertion of additional warrant articles associated with the purchase of the water system, Article MM and other matters. Article MM, Water Company Acquisition. Article NN, Board of Water Commissioners. Article OO, Water System Enterprise Fund. Article PP, Water Company Acquisition Transition Costs. Article QQ, Master Plan Committee, and to close the warrant for the 2019 Annual Town Meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Compressor station.
Thank you.
Next up.
Is Tom going to tee this up?
What do we have here, Tom?
Sure.
Sure. Hold on. Great job. Great job. Great job.
There we go. Just had to get to it. Okay, so as you know, as the board knows, there's a proposal to build a compressor station, natural
Do you guys want
gas.
to come up? That way you can...
Yeah, yeah, I'll wait.
Trying to get through the meeting.
Ready?
Continue.
Thank you. So as we know, there's been an effort by a private enterprise to build a compressor station, a natural gas compressor station in Weymouth on Route 3A at the Fore River Bridge, and this has been discussed at length at our meetings over the last couple of years. There have been many community meetings around the region, and the latest issue that was recently decided by the state was that the Mass DEP had granted an air quality permit to the developer, and this is against Weymouth's wishes. It was against our stated wishes and some other communities as well. To that end, tomorrow marks the deadline for filing appeals to that decision. And in discussions with our town council today, not directly with Council Coughlin, but with Council Ryan, who is a partner of Council Coughlin. So should we need any help, John is here to help us. But the intent is that we would, and I'll read Kerry's statement directly, but that our council has been in contact with Weymouth's council with regard to the Mass DEP granting of the air quality permit for the proposed Weymouth compressor station. As a result of those discussions, our council recommends that the town file a joinder in the appeal being filed by Weymouth, Braintree, and Quincy. So to that end, there's a proposal motion in your packets that that council is recommending we pass.
Questions from my colleagues, comments? Otherwise, I'll open it up to the public.
I had a chance to talk with Attorney Ryan today, and I've been briefed and satisfied with the motion.
Yeah. I just want to, I've had several conversations with Kerry over the last few weeks, and he has had several conversations with Weymouth Council on how to best approach this, what would be most helpful for Weymouth. And I can tell you that the action that Council is recommending is actually something that Weymouth Council has said would be very much appreciated. I would also say, and thank you for the note that she wrote, I agree with you that when that we need to get ourselves into Congressman Lynch's meeting, which we intend to do, and I think we also you had a suggestion that the LEPC documented concerns are also shared. So I think that as well is appropriate. So there is a good amount of coordination that is going on by a lot of the necessary parties, and as I hope you can appreciate too, when you have lawyers talking within communities, there is an aspect to that represents legal strategy. So we want to be careful the extent to which we talk about things in public, but I can assure you that the conversations with Weymouth Council, there have been several of them. They have been substantive because and I think this recommendation here makes an awful lot of sense.
Yes, Mr. Mullally.
Do you want me to step up?
I certainly do.
Okay. Just one small. I would just
Identify yourself by name and address,
Oh,
sir.
Michael Mullally, 14 Cushing Avenue.
Good evening.
I would just make one little amendment. Let yourself open, because we know the city of Braintree, the town of Braintree has joined in the appeal, and I think Quincy might also join, so don't just limit yourself to Weymouth. You could have that as your thing, or make your amendment, or whatever.
It's part of the motion.
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would anyone like to comment, or? You're not obliged to, but to the extent you might want to.
Jen Murphy, 29 Bradley Hill Road. I just want to thank you on behalf of the Hingham residents against the compressor station for your continued support in this effort. Obviously, you referenced Jennifer Mathian's letter from this morning saying we would ask that you vote tonight to follow in the appeal for the air quality permit. It's really our best effort at this point, to put Hingham residents' interest top of mind, and we really appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd also just want to thank the members of the Compressor Station Task Force who have been keeping us apprised of different timing and different pieces of information. And, with something like this, we all got to kind of help each other and work together in terms of information, opportunities, and so we appreciate the task force's continued efforts.
I'll entertain a motion that the town file the paperwork with the Mass DEP to join in the motion for an adjudicatory proceeding being filed by Weymouth, Braintree, and Quincy with regard to the air quality permit for the proposed Weymouth compressor station.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thanks for hanging with the meeting tonight. And
thank you.
Okay. Throw Army. All right. Entertain a motion to waive the building permit fees associated with the Bathhouse project.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Entertain a motion to waive the electrical permit fees associated with replacing a heat pump at Town Hall.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're meeting next week, Tom?
Yes.
Would it be more appropriate to read the proclamation
Yes.
Next week.
next week?
Yeah.
Prior to the event, yes.
So I'm not going to read it tonight.
You don't have to read it tonight.
Okay.
Not until the, 16th, I believe?
I'm going to put some body English into this bit.
We didn't want you to miss your opportunity, that's all.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, folks. Stay tuned.
Coming in hot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that ends the formal business of the evening. And I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, watching at home, that was an awesome meeting. It was polite, respectful, highly educational and instructive. I hope that you're following along. If you're not, I think that gave you a pretty good overview of what we're going to be doing. I do anticipate that there's going to be some rather spirited discussion by those that don't necessarily hold the same view we do. But nevertheless, town meeting is coming, and it'll be here before you know it, so I just ask that you try and educate yourself to this extremely important issue. We've literally spent the entire time I've been in this seat, in one form or another, addressing this, so it'll be good to get it to town meeting. Before we sign off, John, I want to thank you for all the assistance you've given us. Really appreciate it, as well as your colleague, Kerry Ryan. Did a great job on that lawsuit. Shell and Tom, thank you so much. Karen, great job. And Mary, I just got to say,
Yeah, I'm just trying
you
to
should
keep
get
up.
an award.
For doing my job.
Doing it well. So, on that note, that's all I have to say. If anybody else would like to add anything before we sign off.
I'm all good.
I just let people know that, this is the time when a lot of really important things are coming before the town in a lead up to town meeting. Proposed plastic bag ban, a lot of different things. Something related to Foster School with respect to the feasibility study, obviously, the water company, and over the next several weeks, there are going to be a series of public meetings. The Hingham events calendar has all the meetings posted. Most of them take place here in Town Hall in the evenings, and you know, there are some complex issues on the warrant this year, so those hearings often, they're smaller than town meeting, opportunity for questions, and as you saw tonight, some of our work was shaped by some of the hearings that were held last week, and that's the very fine tradition in Hingham. So to the extent that there's something that you're interested in, come and lend your voice, come and lend your thoughts. It only makes the process better, and it just leads to a more engaged town meeting.
Paul, I did have one comment. I just wanted to remind everyone, it's very cold out there. To the extent that you have elderly neighbors, please feel free to reach out to them. It's always a good idea to check in on those that might have some higher needs in weather like this.
Before we adjourn, I'd just like to say that next Tuesday is the last day that Robert Mansfield, who was a sergeant in the Hingham Police, will be serving this town as an active duty sergeant. I had the pleasure and privilege of working with Bob when I was in uniform, and I have to tell you, he was really dedicated to keeping this town safe, and by all accounts, he's done a great job as sergeant, as a mentor, with the younger officers that are in the department today. Next Friday at 5, it's his last day out the door. If you're around, we'd welcome you to come. Just say so long. It's not too often you have 40-year men walking out the door. So, enjoy your retirement, Bob. Well done. Motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everyone.